So we are 4 lines from the bottom of Daf Kuf Daled Amud Bet, 5 lines from the bottom, Kuf Daled Amud Bet. We're talking about Parim HaNisrafim. It's for you, Nava. We're talking about Parim HaNisrafim, which are the Parim and Sirim HaNisrafim, which are the Parim and the Sirim. Good morning, Charlie. Just getting started in the bottom of Kuf Daled Amud Bet, 5 lines from the bottom. Talking still about the Parim HaNisrafim, Sirim HaNisrafim, which are the Karbanot, including the Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibor, the Par Kohen Mashiach, the Parim of Yom Kippur, right? The Sa'ir of Yom Kippur, that's the Sa'ir, that are all taken after you put them on the Mizbeach and sprinkle the blood, and you burn them outside 3 machanot, which we learned yesterday. We'll see the source of it maybe today or tomorrow. But the pasuk says that the person who's carrying them, hasarefotam, the one who burns them, it says by Yom Kippur, is tamei ad ha'arev, right? And you have to mechabes begadav and tamei ad ha'arev. Says the Gemara today. The question is, by Rabbi Elazar, 4 lines on the bottom. Parim hanisrafim, masim hanisrafim, sheyatza rubo b'miut aver. Right? Let's say the most of the animal goes outside, but one of the legs, let's say, goes out, and only a little bit of that leg. So 20 legs of the animal of cows are very big, right? They could be 2 feet long. So 1/4 of that leg went out, and most of the animal went out, but most of the leg is still inside. So what do you say? Do you say bata ruba shadin leg? You say this leg goes with the robe of the animal. And when you burn it, or you come tamei, Rashi says, or burn it according to Tosfot, the whole thing gets burnt. Odilma, or do you say halo nafkaler? Sorry, and it did not. Most of the leg did not go out, so you don't burn it. Odilma bata ruba de beima shadin leg. Or do you say this is part of the robe of the animal? You don't look at the leg, you look at the whole animal. So then he said, Pshita, that's really not a good question. You don't leave behind the majority of the animal, Vaslina, but the ruba de and look at the limb itself. You look at the animal as an entity. Ella, really what his question was, the case where exactly half the animal left the Hazara. Shiyatza chetzio birov aver. Exactly half the animal left, but it was most of the leg. Do you then say, well, since most of the leg left, all the leg left, and then it's more than half the animal? Or not? Hi, mibaili. The hi miuta de aver, do you look at the small part of that limb and say, bata ruba de aver shadinale, throw it or put it with the rove of the aver, vanafikle, and that left, so most of the animal left the azara, and it's tameh, people carrying it al tameh, etc. Odoma bata behema shadinale, take it. We didn't have a resolution to that question. So that was the first version of this. Rabba bar Rav Huna, Matila Bib Gavri. Rabbi Rav Huna had the same question about the people. This is much more exciting, but not exciting, but it's much more tangible. Because people, remember we said in the Mishnah that if you have 4 people carrying the karban outside, 2 in the front leave the azara, they become tamei as soon as they leave the azara. The 2 in the back are not tamei yet because they haven't left the azara. What if you have a majority of people? What if you have begavri hamit askimbo, the people carrying it? Let's say you have chamisha b'nei adam, you have 5 humans, v'nafka tlata, and 3 of them walk outside of the azara, v'nat pashalu trey. You have 2 left behind. So what do you say in that case? Do you say, my, but the rov mit askinaz linan? Do you go after the fact that 3 carriers went outside? You'd have to understand the case here is where most of the animal has not left the azara yet. So they're carrying this animal, but most of it's on the back, like when you carry the couch up the stairs, most of it's on the back, right? And the 3 people in the front have walked outside. So you say, wait a second, since 3 out of the 5 people carrying it have left, most of it has left, and it's therefore tamei. Or do you say, well, since most of the animal's inside, it's not, and basically, do you look at the animal or do you look at the people? Obater behemaz linan teko, and we actually don't resolve that question. Okay, the next question, 6 lines from the top. Boy, Rabbi Elazar, what if you have, and this is a very complex Gemara, I'm going to do it very simply because it's Daf Yomi, and do Rashi's version, which makes a little bit of sense, no sense at all to Tosfot. But it says Rashi, says the Gemara, sorry, Boy, Rabbi Elazar, Parim usirim anisrofim. You have these animals that are supposed to be burned. Remember, the regular process is you carry the animal outside, you walk to the Beit HaDeshen, 3 machanot outside, you burn them. The person who carries them is tamei, the person who burns them is tamei. We know this. We're all smart about this. But what if, Ba'i Reb Elazar, what if you take Parim asirim anisrofim, shiyatsu, you walk outside the Azara, and then you go back inside, v'chazru. You walk back inside the Azara. Mao. Miyamrin, do you say, well, look, you left, so they become tamei. Kivan dinafkalahu itzmelu, they became tamei. Odilma, kivan the hadar. Now the Parim hanisrafim are no longer left. So the 3 Kohanim who carried this power outside the Beit HaMikdash, they did nothing in the end of the day because it's back in the Beit HaMikdash. So do you say that they are not tamei because they are not the ones who carried the power outside the Beit HaMikdash? because it went back inside. Now, Tosa says this is a little ridiculous because when did you ever hear of something where you become tamei by carrying it outside and then you walk back inside and you become tahar? So Tosis understands that's referring to new people. The first three people carried it outside, they're tamei. They never get out of that. But then you brought it back inside and three new people carried it out. Do they become tamei for carrying it out or it was already taken out? So you can't take it out again. So anyways, one of those versions, that was the question. I'm sure you wondered the same thing, Nava. Or do you say, Kivan the Hador Hador, it went back inside, so you start the clock again. So Amar Baba Ramamel Tashma. Well, let's try to prove it from the Braita, which I'm sorry, this is from our Mishnah. The Mishnah said, 10 lines from the top. Hayusovlin oto b'motot. Let's say they're carrying it with these spits, right? They're these poles. Harishonim yatzu chutz lechomat hazara. The first ones left the walls of the azara. Achronim lo yatzu. And the last ones did not leave yet. So says the Mishnah, Harishonim sheyatzu chutz lechomat hazara mitamim begadim. The inside ones are tamei. Achronim ein mitamim begadim ad sheyetzu. Until they left. Okay? Now, that's what the Mishnah said. Says Rav Abba Bar Mamo, if you claim that as soon as you walk outside, you become tamei because you took it out, why don't you say that the ones on the inside should also become tamei because they are carrying something that itself has left the Azara? So even though they're standing inside the Azara, they've carried the Parim Anisrafim or Shem Anisrafim that have already left. How do you know they already left? Because the outside people are already tamei. Now, if you say when you bring it back inside, you sort of abrogate that, I understand. They don't become tamei because essentially their part is still inside. But if you say once it leaves, and that's no way to change that, why aren't they tamei as well? Says the Gemara, because there's obviously another reason for that. And the reason for that is Tizbara, Amar Ravina, Tizbara, could they really be tamei? Remember what the Torah says is that the ones who carry it become tamei, they go to the mikvah, and then they can go back into the machaneh. But these people are standing in the Azara. How could you say about them, you're tamei, go to the mikvah and then go back inside? I'm inside. What do you mean going back inside? Says Ravina, it's impossible to become tamei if you're inside. But Tizbara, habaina va'achar yavo el hamachaneh v'leka. It says you then go back into the machaneh, and that's impossible. Ella Reb Elazar hichiboila. So then what was Reb Elazar's question? Right? If you're impossible to become tamei when you're standing inside the Azara, right? So then what's the question? Remember, Reb Elazar's question was, you left and you brought it back inside. So when you bring it back inside, does it become tamei again with carrying it out? Let's go Tosas Pshat. It's a lot easier, right? The different people. Three people carried it out, then they brought it back inside, and then three new people carried it out. Said Tosfot, do those three new people carried out become tamei? But what's the question? If you're inside the Azar, you never become tamei. So of course the three people don't become tamei, right? Ella says the Gemara, no. Kigon, hechibayla, kigon, the nakitile bibukulski. I don't know what that word is. Bibukulsi. They're carrying it out with bakulsi, which means some version of chains, basically. That they're basically, the carbon is inside the Azara, right? They're standing outside. And so if they're standing outside and it's inside, generally, if it's still inside, you would say it hasn't left yet, right? But this carbon already left and came back inside. So since it already left, it's already like every other Parim Anisrafim that left, and anybody who picks it up and carries it becomes tamei. Or do you say once it goes back into the Azara, it loses that status? We don't know the answer. But certainly people standing in the Azara never become tamei because you can't read the pasuk that says you become tamei and then go back into the machaneh and become tahar about people standing inside the Azara. So that's a very complicated case. Okay. Anyways, we are up.
I have a question.
Ask away, Charlie. Charlie, can you hear it? We don't hear you anymore. I don't hear you, Charlie. I don't know if you're speaking or if my sound is off.
The pole is going to become tamei because it's a kli. And so why would the people behind it not become tamei because they're touching something that has been touched by someone who's tamei?
Okay, that is a great question. I didn't hear your whole question, but I think I heard enough of it to give you an answer, which is a beautiful introduction to our next Gemara.
Oh, okay. I didn't read ahead.
So not for the reason you asked it, but it's a great introduction. So let me just remind everybody in this call, and it's really complicated, that taharot are the most complicated thing in the world, right? So let's just start with that principle. They're very, very complex. And the answer to your question, really, Charlie, is that in order mo this is complicated. Let me try to phrase it the right way. There are it's much easier to make food tameh than to make a person tameh. Let me put it that way.
Um,
Right? And so generally, objects that become tameh do not make a human tameh afterwards unless they are tumat meat or zava, let's say, right? But unless they're av hatuma, like if a person, let me put it this way, if a person touches food that's tameh, they do not become tameh. Food is not metame a person, except for some, again, they're very rare exceptions.
Novella.
Well, that's a perfect. So you're right on. That's today's whole Gemara. But
Oh, okay.
put aside
I
Nevela
can
for
wait.
a second. Put aside Nevela, which is a great exception. Nevela is really the exception of food. The only real other exceptions are Zav, right, and Tumat Meit as
Mhm.
well, right, where there
Yeah.
are examples. But generally, food and also objects, unless the object is an Av Hatuma, does not make a person Tameh, right? So an object that's a Rishon L'Tumah does not make a person Tameh. There's no sheni of a person. The whole concept of sheni l'tumah is by food, right? So, or maybe
Mhm.
kli in the Beit HaMikdash, right? There's obviously different standards in the Beit HaMikdash, and then
Yeah.
shlishi and revi for truma and for kachim, but that doesn't apply to people. People really only become a rishon l'tumah. So a person touches an avatuma, right? A tamei mate, let's say, or a kli that's tamei mate, or a knife that was killed a person with, right? Which is an avi avot tuma. Anyways, in general, we don't transfer tuma. So touching to answer your question specifically, if the food itself, because remember what the pasuk says is that if you're carrying the parim hanisrafim, you become tamei, the person, and the food, and sorry, and your clothes that you're wearing become tamei. Okay. But the
Mhm.
food is not necessarily tameh. We're going to ask that question in a second. We're going to say it is, but right now we don't know that. And the spit that you're carrying it is not tameh, right? It's just you and your
Mhm.
clothing. So it's really just the person and the clothing on top of it. Now, the basis of this, and this is the question we're about to address, which again is going to be really hard to do in the Daf Yomi time frame, but we're going to try, is
Okay.
is how in the world, what about the actual meat of the parim hanisrafim, right? Does that
Mhm.
make other food tameh, or does it make people in your question tameh, right? And so, if you recall, and we're about to quote this Braita, the Torah, when it describes food becoming tameh, has a very interesting pasuk, which we've read 1,000 times, I would say. And the pasuk goes like this: It says, if you have a nevela, right, a nevela becomes tameh, and it says, and I'm reading now from Vayikra Yud Aleph Lamed Zayin because I have it in my beautiful Gemara. V'chi yipol min nivlatan al kol zera zarua asher yizareya tahorhu, right? If it falls from a nevela onto seeds that are planted, they are tahor. And what we learn from there is that food only becomes tameh if it's ready to be eaten, right? Meaning if it's planted, if it's attached to the ground, or even if you've harvested it, but it's not what's called mufshar, right? It's not prepared for tuma, food does not become tameh. And usually, in order to be machshir something for tuma, you have to make it wet, right? That was usually water has to fall in it. It could be rainwater, it could be regular. We had a lot of discussions about what kind of water.
But the other six liquids, yeah.
Or other liquids, correct. And there's a whole
Yeah.
masechta about mashkim, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so there's a lot of discussion about what makes a food tameh, but the presumption is that if you go to your farm and you harvest your corn, let's say, and you lay it out to, I don't know if corn's a great example. Let's say you harvest your apples and you lay them out to sit and, I don't know, to get dry. I don't know why you would do that for apples. They are not mikabel tuma until they've been ready to be eaten. And ready to be eaten is defined as either water falls on them that you want to fall on them, or potentially you pick it up and say, I want to eat this thing. Okay. So in general, food is, and then of course that food becomes tameh. It doesn't make other people tameh, right? Food is what's called tuma kala. Okay. Now there are exceptions, and one of the primary exceptions, the one that Charlie raised, is what's called nevelat of tahor, where there's a very specific example that if you take a nevela, dead chicken, right, of tahor,
Mhm.
and you put it in your mouth, it's called
Yeah.
tameh abeit habli'ah when you swallow it. So actually putting it in your mouth is not, if you put it in your mouth and spit it out, you're not tameh. When you swallow it, the person becomes tameh. And that's a very unique example. Usually a person does not become tameh from food, but in nevela, you become tameh from food. Okay. Another example, which is why we're quoting this now, is pariman israfim, where if you pick up the pariman israfim and you carry them, the person becomes tameh, which is unusual halacha. Usually a person does not become tameh from food. Okay? Got it? You with me? You're going to say sure. Let us then start the Gemara Tanu Rabbanan. So we are around 15 lines from the top, And the Braita, actually, the side person, the Shita here, brings a Tosefta, which is a little bit of a better girsa than what we have. It's a lot better, actually, which should read the following: Hasoref para uparim, a person who burns the parim, the para, sorry, the para is the para duma, the parim are the parim anisrafim, the hamishaleach et sa'ir, okay, and the one who sends out the sa'ir. Now, our version is not different, it just is not so clear, because our version is parim upara sa'ir mishtaleach, right? So these three things, hamishaleach, right, the one who either burns it with the parim and the para, or the one who carries it outside or who sends it out, the sa'ir mishtaleach, has sarfan, the one who sends it out and the one who burns them, hamotzian, those people are mitame begadim. That's the pasuk, right? Pasuk says the person who burns it is mitame begadim, right? And we learn a gzer shava to sayir mishtaleach and to other parim and to sayirim. Anyways, that halacha is clear. But hein atzman, they themselves, meaning the animal itself, ein mitamim begadim. If a beged, a kli, let's say, a clothing or a pot, touches the meat of the Sa'ir HaMishtaleach, when Sa'ir HaMishtaleach is alive, touches the animal of the Sa'ir HaMishtaleach, or touches the meat of the Parim HaNisrafim, it does not become Tameh. So this is a very interesting thing, because they make a person Tameh, but they don't make clothing Tameh, let's say, unless the clothing the person's wearing. But they don't make other clothing Tameh, okay? Aval, says the Braita, and this is the big Chiddush, mitamin ochlin umashkin. If food or drink touch the parim anisrafim, it becomes tameh. So the parim anisrafim will make the person burning it tameh and the person carrying it. They'll make food tameh, but they will not make other things that touch it tameh. Okay, because their tumah is limited to the person who carries it and burns it, and a special halacha, we're going to see how we know it in a second, that it's also metame food. That's the opinion of Rebbe Meir. The Chachamim say, one second, I agree with you for part of it, but not all of it. Para uparim, the para aduma and the parim anisrafim are mitamin ochlinu mashkin. Because what's unique to them? They're dead. But the sayur mishtaleach inu mitameh shu chai. The sayur mishtaleach is a living animal. Living animals never make something tameh. Now, of course, they make the person who carries it tameh, or the person who leads it, but that's a special halacha. But in general, living animals don't make other things tameh, and therefore they will not make the foodstuffs that touch it tameh. As the Braita continues, hachai inu mitameh ochlinu mashkin. The living things do not mitameh ochlinu mashkin. Okay, so that is the machloket Rebbe Meir and the Chachamim. Says the Gemara, Bishlam Rebbe Meir. Now I understand Rebbe Meir's source. What's the source? Why would parim anisrafim, right, be mitame ochlim, right? Usually, a tummy thing is not mitame ochlim unless the food has been prepared to become tameh. But why would this be mitame ochlim? Kedetanad Rebbe Yishmael, based on the famous and oft quoted Tanad Rebbe Yishmael. The Tanad Rebbe Yishmael call, and the pasuk I read earlier, I'll call zera zarua, right? If it falls on any seed, what do we learn from the seeds? That ma ziraim. The reason that seeds that are touched by a nevela do not become tameh is because ein sofan l'tameh tumah chamura. They don't have any high-level tumah, meaning they can't make a person tameh, right? Because there's no case where a seed makes a person tameh. Even if a seed becomes tameh, it only makes other food tameh, because food only is tameh other foods, right? And shrichin hechsher. They need to be hechsher, meaning they need to be prepared to be ready to be eaten. And now that they're seeds, they're not ready to be eaten because you can't eat a seed. You got to grind it up and you've got to prepare it. Okay, so therefore, af kol says Tanna Rebbe Yishmael. Where am I? Af kol she'ein sofan l'tamei tumah chamura. Anything that is not ultimately going to make tumah chamura, meaning it's not going to make a person tamei, tzrichin hechsher. It needs to be a specific step where it's muchshar to mekabel tumah. But that excludes our case. Yatzda nivelat of tahar, which is the case that Charlie raised earlier, that excludes a piece of meat from a of tahar, which if you take a chicken and you go to the store and you buy a chicken that didn't have a shechita, and you pick it up, it will be mitame other food. Why will it be mitame other food? It's not ready to be eaten because no one's eating this chicken. It's a treif chicken, or it's not hechsher chicken. But it doesn't need to be ready for people to eat it because since it can be mitame tumah chamura, meaning since if you swallowed it, it would make a human tameh, it automatically makes other food tameh. So yatsa of tahar, nevelat of tahar, shesofolo tameh tumah chamura, Therefore, ein tzricha hechsher. So that's the Tana of Rabbi Shmuel. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Meir just did one skip away from that, and he said, "Look, the same way that nevelat of tahor can be matame a person by swallowing it, and therefore it's matame food. The parim anisrafim and the sirim anisrafim and the sarim mishtaleach are all matame the person who carries them, and therefore they're matame other food." Because anything that can be mitame a person, tuma chamura, gets the status of being mitame, other food stuff. So that makes a lot of sense. Since these things are mitame a person, they can be mitame food. But that's why Rabbi Meir says all of these things are mitame ochlin, umashkin. But according to the Rabbanan, who say, well, only if they're dead, but not if they're alive, where in the world do you get dead or alive in this case? It's lohul de Tanad Rabbi Shmuel, if they agree with Tanad Rabbi Shmuel. That basically, the rule that food needs to be mukshar kabel tuma only applies to regular food, but not food that is sofo the tamei tuma chamura, not food that is ultimately going to make a person tamei, then it should apply to everything, including seir mishtaleach. So iyetle, or my iyetle tanad Rabbi Shmuel afil seir mishtaleach nami. Iyetle run tanad Rabbi Shmuel afil par minalan. How would you know that the par of Yom Kippur or the par or the paraduma or things like that are mitameh? So it's a really good question. Says the Rav Dimi, well, I got an answer. When I was in Eretz Yisrael, I went to a shir and they told me a great answer. Rav Dimi Amar, he said, Amri b'marava, they taught me in Eretz Yisrael that when Rabbi Shmuel said you need hechsher, he did not mean you need to be ready to eat the thing. In which case, of course, so you would be ready to eat the thing, in which case it might apply to everything. What it means is, where am I? What it means is, tzrichen hechsher tuma mimakom acher. You need to have it become tameh from another source. What does that mean? Meaning the only food stuff that become tameh are things that if something else touches them or makes them tameh, they can spread that tuma. And that applies to things that can become tameh. So, for example, a food that's sitting here, right, generally will not be matame another food, though, sorry. It won't be matame a person either. But if it's the type of food that is able to become tameh and also has tuma chamura, then it can pass on food. But a living animal cannot become tameh, right? Because think about it. If a sheretz touches food, it becomes tameh. But if a sheretz jumps on the back of a horse, the horse does not become tameh, right? If it's alive, right? So therefore, since living things cannot become tameh from an external source, right? Because tuma does not apply to living things, therefore it's excluded from Tana Rabbi Yishmael. So Tana Rabbi Yishmael was basically saying only things that themselves can become tameh, right? That's clause number one, which means they're dead. And number two, they are sofo l'tameh tuma chamura. They eventually can make a human being tameh. What are things that can eventually make a human being tameh? So we have two prime examples. One is nevelat of tahar, right? If you have a nevelat of tahar, yeah. You have a dead, unshechted chicken or other bird, right? That if you swallowed it, it would make a person tameh. You haven't swallowed it yet, but it has the potential to make a person tameh. And the other one is the parim anisrafim and sirim anisrafim, which if you carry them, you're going to become tameh. So those are things that because they are both able to become tameh because they're dead, and they are sofan the tameh tuma chamura, they will in fact be metameh other ochlin umashkin. So that is the Chachamim's opinion. Okay, very complicated, but hopefully clear enough. Continues the Gemara now, 10 lines from the bottom. Let's extend this to the next step, because that's what you wanted to do. Boy, Rabbi Elazar. If you have parim sirim anisrafim, ma'ash yutamu ochlin umashkin bifnim kibachutz. We just told you that the animal that's outside the Beit HaMikdash, you carry out the parim anisrafim, if food touches them, the food becomes tameh. But what if they're still inside the Beit HaMikdash? They haven't actually left yet, so they're not parim anisrafim that are tameh yet, but they will be. So do you treat them inside like they're about to become tameh or not? So do you treat them bifnim kibachutz? Do you say that mechusar yitziyah, the fact that you haven't yet carried them outside, is kimechuser ma'aseh dami? It's as if you're missing a fundamental act in these things, and therefore they're not mitameh. Odom, lo, you say no. So that was his question, and then he said, that's not really a good question. But to Debaya, after he asked the question under Pashta, he resolved it for himself to say that mechusar yitziyah kimechuser ma'aseh dami, that in fact, yeah, of course, since you haven't brought it outside yet, it's not mitameh yet. So you're missing the fundamental action that makes the parim anisrafim mitameh, because you haven't carried them outside yet. So therefore, they're not mitameh ochlin inside the Beit HaMikdash. Okay, the next question, 6 lines from the bottom. Was Rabbi Abba bar Shmuel Rabbi Chia bar Abba. What about nivelat of tahar? So the case not so remember we had two primary cases that are subject to tumah chamura. One is parim anisrafim, which are mitame the carrier and the burner. The other is nivelat of tahar, where again you have a piece of chicken that was not shechted properly, so it's a nivela. If you swallow that piece of chicken, the person becomes tamei, a real tuma of avatuma really, the person, and he can be matame other things. That's a special halacha. What about, says the Gemara? What about according to Rabbi Meir? We got it. Velat of tahar Rabbi Meir maushi tameh bikizayit. What about the shear of a kazayit? So now we said that since it's so full of tamei tumah chamura, it is mitame ochlin like other food stuff. But remember that food is always mitame with the shear of a kebetza, an egg, which is two zaytim. When you swallow things, you're mitame with the zayit. So if you swallow this thing, you're tamei with the zayit. If you touches other things, it usually would be a betza. What about nevelat of tahar? Do you say it's mitame ochlin with the kazayit because that's the size that you would swallow, or do you say it's a food thing, so you have to treat it like all other food things, and therefore it's a betza? So that was the question. I'm sure you were wondering the same question. So answered the Gemara, well, where is this piece of meat? If it's machta la'ara, if it's sitting on the ground, so then no one is planning to eat it, right? Meaning it's not in your hand. So then lo tiboy lecha, that it's a food stuff and you need a kibetza. The naka bipume, if it's in your mouth, then everyone agrees you're eating it, and therefore it's basically a kizayit. Lo tiboy lecha, that you need, it's only a kizayit. Ki tiboy lech naka le biyadeh. You have it in your hand. You're sitting there with it on your plate in front of you. So you didn't eat it yet, but it looks like you're about to eat it. So do you say mechuser kreva ki mechuser ma'aseh dami olo? The fact that you didn't put it in your mouth yet, you're missing an action to make it the food thing that you're eating, and therefore it should not be metameh kazayit, or do you not say that? And then we skip the next word for some reason. Basar by Hadar Pashta, top of Daf Kuf Hayam Bet. He answered that in fact mechusar kreva lav ki mechusar maaseh dami. In fact, that's not mechusar maaseh. Since you're about to eat it, it's sitting on your plate or it's in your hand. You're holding the pita with the chicken in it. Therefore, it's as if you're about to eat it, and therefore it's mitame in the share of the kizayit. Okay, so basically, this is a separate and really important and innovative halacha, which again, the implications of it escape the quick meaning of daf yomi, which is that because a nevelat of tahar that you swallow, that a human swallows, is going to make the person tameh, it's called tumah chamura, and therefore it also will make other food tameh, even without hechsher, even without being prepared to be eaten or anyone saying I'm going to eat this thing, and we're saying now even with the kazayit. Ask the Gemara, but is that true? Eitvei, but we have a Breita. And the Breita says the following. This is actually the first Mishnah in Masechet Taharot. The opening Mishnah, many people learn this Mishnah and then stop learning Masechet Taharot because it's incredibly difficult, like me sometimes. It's happened to me a few times already. But the first Mishnah, Masechet Taharot, says the following. Shlosha asar dvarim nemru b'nevelat of tahar. There's 13 things to remember about nevelat of tahar. V'zu echad mehem. Now one of them is tzricha machshava, that you have to plan to eat it. Right? Because if you're not planning to eat it, then it's not a food stuff. It means you have to have the intention to eat it, and therefore it can be mitame other things. Again, not our sugya. Ein tzricha hechsher. It does not need to be muchshar in the sense that it doesn't need to be washed or clean. As long as you have a machshava to eat it, that's enough. And again, not our point. Our point is the next words. Mitame tumat ochlim b'kebetza. It's mitame other food with a betza. Now that's against what we just said. We just said that it's a kizayit. Right? That because since when you eat it, you need a kazayit, and you're going to eat it, that's all you need. And my love, Rabbi Meir, this must be Rabbi Meir. Says, well, that's not Rabbi Meir. The Mishnah is Rabbanan. Lo Rabbanani. How could it be the Rabbanan? Hakatani Reisha, the first part of the Mishnah said, Tzricha machshava, vein tzricha hechsher. And that was the opinion we just quoted from Tanit B'Rei B'Shmuel according to Rabbi Meir. Man Shamalei Haisvar Rabbi Meir. Umi Dereisha Rabbi, so that must be, the first part of the Mishnah was Rabbi Meir. Umi Dereisha Rabbi Meir, Sefer Nami Rabbi Meir. Since the Dereisha is Rabbi Meir, the Sefer should also be Rabbi Meir. And we answer like we often do. We don't feel constrained by that. Midi area, Hakidita. The ratio is Rabbi Meir, who says you need hechsher. But the Sefer, or the middle part we're going to see in a second, was the Rabbanan, who say that you need a kibetza. But according to Rabbi Meir, you would not need a kibetza, you would only need a kazayit in order to become tameh. So that is how we answer that. I asked the Gemara, but what about the next part of the Mishnah? because again, we're continuing this Mishnah in Tarot. Hamidiktani Seifa, the end of the Mishnah in Tarot says, Shchitata umalikata mitaheret trefata mitumata, which is a separate halacha, which we're going to learn right now, which is that, let's say you have a trefa, okay? So remember, again, I want to go back for one quick second. A nevela is an animal that just died, right? Or was just shot in the heart with an arrow, right? So a nevela is mitame tuma chamura. A human becomes tameh by eating a nevela of a tahar animal if abetabliya, when he swallows, or he or she swallows that animal, right? That kazait. What about if the animal's a treifa, right? So let's say the chicken was a treifa, and then you shechted that chicken. So do you say, wait, you're not tameh because it was a treifa, so you can't eat it anyways? Or do you say the fact that you did the shechita makes it nevela in order to, sort of takes it out of the status of treifa in order for it to become something that you become tameh? So that's a machloket of between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim that's not relevant to our Gemara, but it's something to remember because Rabbi Meir holds that shechita takes it out of the status of nevela, right? And therefore it's not tameh abetabliya, right? And the Mishnah says that opinion because the Mishnah says the following: shchitata or malikata mitaheret trefata mitumata. That if you shecht it or do malika for a bird, you take out the trefa from tumah. So therefore, if you swallow it, you're not tameh. No, you're not kosher because it's a trefa, but you're not tameh. So man shamalei haisvar, who holds this opinion? That's Rabbi Meir. So now the Mishnah is going like Rabbi Meir in the first part and in the third part, and you're saying the middle part is the Chachamim, which is very confusing. Reisha of a Sefer Rabbi Meir Mitziata Rabbanan. Says word, yep, that's exactly it. Yes, Reisha of a Sefer Rabbi Meir Umitziata Rabbanan. At the beginning and the end is Rabbi Meir, and the middle is the Rabbanan. So it's a little bit forced, but that is the way you're going to have to explain the Mishnah in Masechet Taharot. Okay, ask the Gemara the next question. These are all continuations. We're almost done. Don't worry, we got only two more of these. But hopefully it's a little touch of Taharot for everyone. Amar le Rav Hamnuna the Rebbe Zera. Rebbe Hamnuna said to Rebbe Zera, slow down. I got a question for you, Rebbe Zera. No one's going to bed until we get an answer to this question. Okay? Lo teiter b'karach. Don't lean on your couch. No YouTube time. Ad da'amritli hamilton, until you can explain the following thing to me, right? What's the question? Nevelat of tahar Rabbi Meir, right? If you have a nevelat of tahar according to Rabbi Meir, it's not clear if this could be the Chachamim too as well, but let's just go with Rabbi Meir, right? So Rabbi Meir, if you recall, said from the Tana Deber Rabbi Yishmael that if you have a nevelat of tahar, so in front of you, sitting on the table, is a piece of a chicken that you bought at Costco that was not shechted, okay? So it's a nevelat of tahar. And it's ready to be roasted, right? We said the halacha is, everyone knows the halacha is that if you eat that piece of meat and you eat a kazayit, you become tameh in Beit Abliya. Rabbi Meir taught us today that that piece of meat will make other food tameh, right? That was a chiddush. That food will make other things tameh because it's mitameh tumah chamura on a human, therefore it makes other food tameh. The question is, when it makes other food tameh, is it like the normal chain of Tuma, where Rishon, Sheni, Shlishi, if it's Truma, or is it just a one-time thing? Is it like just a Gzerat Katuv, basically? It makes something Tameh, but that thing does not pass on Tuma, or is it a regular Tuma chain, right? So the question he asked him was, let me read that inside, Ha Milton, Velat of Tahar, the Rabbi Meir, Monin la Rishon v'Sheni, or Ein Monin Rishon v'Sheni? Do you count the levels of Tuma, or you don't count the levels of Tuma? Amar, he said to him, no, this is a separate halacha. Kol heicha nitama adam b'maga. Anything that can touch a person, mitame a person by touching them, right? So, for example, the classic example is by a zav, right? So by a zav, or let's say a zav, it could be other things too, a sheretz and a klicheres, but let's say a zav. If a zav who's an avatuma touches, a zav passes on tuma at his or her own level, right? So if a zav touches food stuff, that food can become an avatuma and be matame a person. That person that can then be matame something else, right? Or the food can be matame another food. So if the zav touches a food, it then passes on to the next food, to the next food. So in those cases where you can be matame and adam b'maga, it can be matame a person by touching the food, then monon lo rishon v'sheni. Then you have the normal principle of tuma of first level, second level, third if you have truma, etc. But kol hecha, like any case like nevelat of tahor, the ein mitame adam b'maga, right? A person who touches the chicken does not become tameh. only a person who eats the chicken. So therefore, ein monen bo rishon v'sheni, there's no status of rishon v'sheni. And so even though you've innovated this halakha today, that if another food touches that chicken, the food becomes tamei, it will not pass on that tumah to any other foods. That's what he told him before he rested. And one final related question, which is related only in the halacha, is Ba'amine Reb Zera Reb Ami Bar Chia. Reb Zera asked Reb Ami Bar Chia, Namila Reb Oven Bar Kahana, Hatitznan. There's a Mishnah, again, unrelated to us, but we'll see why we're quoting in a second, that there's a Mishnah that says, where's the Mishnah? Not exactly sure, but it says somewhere in a Mishnah. Oh, he says Tanya, so it's not a Mishnah. Had Tanya, this Braita, which says Chiburei ochlin aidei mashkun chibur l'tumah kala vein chibur l'tumah chamura. Let's say, remember, food in order to become tamei needs to have a kibetza, right, a size of an egg. Let's say you have two pieces of food, two pieces of meat, and they are not touching each other. So they're on a tray, and on one side of the tray is half a betza, that's just a kazayit. The other half of the tray is another half a betza. So if you touch that meat, you're not tummy because you didn't touch a kazayit, a betza, sorry, right? Or a food that touches it is not tummy. However, what if there's liquid that joins those two? You got a stream of oil between them. So the Mishnah, the Braita teaches that mashkin is a chibur. It does connect that piece of meat. So since they're actually in the same, they're being touching each other through liquid. If you touch one piece of meat, you're like touching the whole thing, and it's tamei. Okay, but it's only tumah kala, meaning only to tamei a food, but not tumah chamura, not to tamei a person. So in that case, said Rabbi, all these rabbis, what were their names? Said my Rabbi Zera from Rabbi Ami Bar Chia or Rabbi Bar Kahana, since we said chiburei ochlin aidei mashkin, that when you connect food through liquid, it's a chibur l'tumah kala ve'in chibur l'tumah chamura. Is that a regular halacha of tumah? Monen bo rishon v'sheni or ein monen bo rishon v'sheni? Do you have all the statuses of tumah, first level, second level, etc.? And Amalei said the same answer to him. That kol hecha de mitamei adam, anything that's mitamei adam, like or by maga, as we had earlier, monim bo rishon v'sheni. But this, since ein mitamin adam, ein mitamei adam, ein monim bo rishon v'sheni. So this does not have all the halachot of tumah because it's really clearly just sort of a special exera, essentially, of adding tumah for food stuff and not for everything else. You should go. Have fun. Okay, so we are done with Tumah. Hopefully that was a good primer for everyone. Tumah, as you know, is very complex, and I obviously didn't only scratch the surface here. But now we're going to get back to Kachim, what's easier for today. So says the Gemara now, the two dots. Remember our Mishnah said that, and this is very interesting, right? So back to Parim HaNisrafim. The Mishnah said that if you anyone who burns the Parim HaNisrafim is Tameh, right? And that's based on the pasuk. Pasuk says by the par of Yom Kippur that hasarefotam yitamei begadim yitma erev yichabes begadim yitma erev, or maybe the opposite. I think it's that order, right? The one who burns the par of Kohen Mashiach is tamei. The one who burns the par of Yom Kippur is tamei, and they have to go to the mikveh in the evening, and they are mitamei begadim, right? So that is the one who burns it. The Mishnah added this interesting halacha that those who carry it outside, the second you get outside the Azara, you become tamei. Where in the world do we know that those who carry it outside become tamei as well, right? And then we had a machlok in the Mishnah, because then Rabbi Meir said, you're not tamei. But the Tanna Kama said, Rabbi Eliezer said, you're not tamei. So how do we know that? Minani mili. How do we know that those who carry the Parim HaNisrafim outside of the Azara become tamei? The Tanna Rabbanan. That is based on the Braita. The Braita says, we're at the two dots, around 15 lines from the bottom. The Tanna Rabbanan says the Braita, Lahalon hu omer. Later we're going to see. Now we don't yet know. Remember, we said yesterday that you have to carry the par outside of 3 camps and then burn it. We don't actually know how we know that yet, right? We haven't seen a pasuk, but we're going to find it in a minute. If you wait 4 minutes, it says that you carry the parim hanisrafim chutz l'shalosh machanot, outside of all 3 camps. But kan, by this karban, and this karban is, Rashi says, is the par of Yom Kippurim, it only says machaneh achat. It only says, and the pasuk says, if you recall, Hotziyat par on chutz machaneh, singular. Take the par outside of 1 machaneh and burn it, right? Kasher sarafet par rishon, right? So here it says only machaneh achat. Lo marlecha, what that teaches you is, according to the Braita, that kivan sheyatza chutz machaneh achat, as soon as you carry the par outside of 1 camp, meaning outside of the Azara, mitameh begadim. it is mitame begadim. So the pasuk says by the other parim anisrafim, all three camps, and by the par going a par of Yom Kippur, it says one camp to tell you that as soon as you get out of one machaneh, you become tameh. Ask the Gemara, he gufa minalan. Where do we ever find three camps? How do we know that you're always supposed to carry the parim anisrafim and the sirim anisrafim outside of all three machanot? The Tanu Rabbanan. That's based on the following brayta. The brayta quotes the pasuk. The pasuk says, "Hotzia tapar al michutz lamachaneh." It's the pasuk I just read to you, right? It says by the power of Yom Kippur, carry it outside of the camp. That's lashon yachid. So it says the brayta that is chutz l'shalosh machanot. That means outside of all three machanot. That's the brayta. What do you mean? How do you know that? Ata omer chutz l'shalosh machanot o ela machana achat. You're saying it's three. Maybe it's only one camp. Maybe you just carry it outside the Azara and burn it on Har Habayit. Says the brayta kashu omer bepar ha'ida. By the par ha'ida, remember par ha'ida is the par of the Helen Davar Shel Tzibur, right? The par that's brought for the community. It says michutz l'machaneh. It says the words carried outside michutz l'machaneh. Now you don't need to say that. Shein tzarich lomar. It's an unnecessary pasuk. Shaharei kfar nemar. It already said that you should burn this par kasher sarafet par harishon. The same way you burnt the first par, which was the par of the Kohen Mashiach, right? So since it already said by the first par, take it outside and burn it, and by the second par, which is the par Helam Davar Shel Tzibur, it says take it out and burn it. It's extra to tell you nitain lo machaneh shniya, to tell you a second taking it out, meaning not just one machaneh, but two machanot. And then there's a third pasuk. Keshehu omer michutz lemachaneh bedeshen. When it talks about the deshen, it says go out michutz lemachaneh. She'ein sarach lomar. It doesn't need to say that. Shori kvar nemar el shefach hadeshen yisaref. It already said burn the par at the deshen. So you know the deshen is outside the machaneh because the par is outside the machaneh. So why does it say again go outside the machaneh to the deshen? It's telling you yitin lo machaneh shlishit. It gives you a third machaneh. So basically, we have three machanot that you're supposed to carry the parim anisrafim and sirim anisrafim outside of. But the reason it says machaneh, one machaneh by the par of Yom Kippur, is to tell you that you become tameh as soon as you leave one machaneh. So the carriers become tameh and the burners become tameh as well. And asked him, what about Rabbi Shimon, who disagreed in the Mishnah? He said the wrong name twice, but Rabbi Shimon's the right name. Rabbi Shimon disagreed in the Mishnah and said that the ones who carry it do not become tameh. You only become tameh when you burn it. What about this pasuk? What does he do with this extra pasuk of one camp? If you don't become tameh outside of one camp, Rabbi Shimon michutz l'machaneh my avilei. He uses that libali ketanya. He uses it for the following teaching of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer Omer nemer kan chutz l'machaneh. It says by the power of Yom Kippur, carried outside of one camp. And it says later, lahalan is referring to the para aduma. It says chutz l'machaneh. Ma lahalan, just like the para aduma is chutz l'shalosh machanot, and that's outside of all three camps. Afkan chutz l'shalosh machanot. So why does it say one machaneh? Ma lahalan, to tell you that just like over there, so I said the opposite. We learn from Yom Kippur is chutz l'shalosh machanot, the para aduma is chutz l'shalosh machanot. Right? But just like Lahalan, by the Para Aduma, it's the Mizracha Shel Yerushalayim. When you take the Para Aduma out, you go to the east of Yerushalayim to do the Para Aduma, right? And we know that based on the Pasuk, which says that you sprinkle it, Nochach Pnei Olam Moed. You sprinkle the Para Aduma to the face of the Olam Moed, remember, which is on the west. So you have to be going out to the east in order to sprinkle it towards the west, right? So just like by Para Aduma, which is the Har Zeitim, right? Just like Paraduma, we know that you go out to the east in order to sprinkle it towards the Azara, right? Afkan the Mizracha Shel Yerushalayim. Here too, when you carry out the Deshen, you carry it out to the east of Jerusalem. So we said earlier, I'm going to stop here, but we said earlier that you have to carry it outside of three camps, but we didn't tell you which direction to go in. Says Rabbi Shimon, the reason the pasuk says by Yom Kippur that you take it outside michutz the machaneh is not to teach you that you become tameh when you go outside one machaneh. It's to teach you that you compare it to Paraduma. And just like by Paraduma, we know you have to go to the east because you have to be facing the Oel Moed. So too, by all parim anisrafim, you have to take them out to the east and you have to burn them somewhere out in the east, past Har Zeitim, right, in some place outside of all three machanot. Tomorrow we'll continue, it's because it goes on for a bit, and ask what the Rabbanan say who don't have that extra pasuk. So we will stop here in a very challenging daf at the top line of Kuf Vav Amud Aleph, and God willing, pick it up again tomorrow for everyone. Us next
Dr. Carr, Shavuot Tov.
Shavua Tov. You can see why Kachim is very challenging.
Thank you. Shavua Tov.
Shavua
Yeah.
Tov.